want to be careful about how I tell this story. I want to be careful because it is not a story that reflects well on anyone involved. Not on me. Not on the woman behind the screen. Not on the man who died. Not on any of us. But I need you to understand what happened because I have spent years thinking about how a person ends up in the place I ended up. And the only way I have been able to make any sense of it, the only framework that comes close to explaining the distance between who I was before and what I became, is to go back to the beginning, to the profile, to the name, to the photograph of a girl I never actually met. I was in my mid-40s when this started. I had been married for over a decade, had children, had a job, had what looked from the outside like an ordinary, functioning middle American life. Inside that life, I was unhappy in the way that people are unhappy, when the distance between who they imagined they would become and who they actually are has grown too wide to bridge in any conventional way. I am not offering this as an excuse. I am offering it as context. Because without the context, you cannot understand how a man who should have known better made the choices he made. I created a profile online, not my real profile, a version of myself that was 20 years younger, thinner, stronger, freer. A version of myself that had the life I had imagined at 20 and had not achieved at 46. The profile had a different name. The photographs were of me, but from years earlier, before the weight, before the gray, before the accumulation of ordinary disappointments. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself it was fantasy, the kind of thing people did, the kind of thing that hurt nobody. And then I met Talhut Blonde. That was her username. She described herself as 18, a dancer living in West Virginia. Her photographs were extraordinary. A young woman with dark hair and green eyes and the kind of looks that register as almost implausible even in photographs. She reached out to me first. We began talking. Within days, it felt like something real. Not the shallow back and forth of online small talk, but something deeper. Something that felt like genuine connection, like being seen. She said things to me that I had not heard from anyone in years. She was interested in my thoughts, in my history, in the details of who I was beneath the version I presented to the world. She said she felt I understood her in a way nobody else did. I believed her. I am not naive by nature. I am not a man who trusts easily or is easily moved. But she found the exact frequency of loneliness that I was broadcasting, and she matched it perfectly. And that precision, which I would later understand was not intuition, but practice, the precision of someone who had done this many times before, felt like fate. We talked every day. Then something happened that I did not anticipate. She began talking to a younger man, a co-worker of mine. I didn't know this at first. She did not tell me. She was conducting the same operation on two people simultaneously, from the same photographs, using the same constructed identity, measuring our responses against each other with the cool calculation of someone running an experiment. When I found out, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Rage. Not the ordinary anger of a man who has been played for a fool. Something older and more destructive than that. The rage of a person who had finally, after years of numbness, found something that felt real, and had had it taken. I became someone I do not fully recognize when I look back. I sent messages. I escalated. The man she had been talking to, a young man who had done nothing to me except exist and be the subject of her attention, became the object of everything I could not control in myself. I shot him. He died. His name was Barrett. He was 22 years old. When the investigation unfolded, everything came apart simultaneously. My deception. Hers. The young woman in the photographs was real. She existed. She was the daughter of the woman I had been talking to. The person behind the profile, the person who had spent months constructing a relationship with me precise enough to manufacture murderous jealousy, was a 45-year-old married mother who had stolen her own daughter's photographs to build a false identity. She had been doing this for years. With many men, with the patient, deliberate methodology of someone who understood exactly what she was doing and why. She was eventually charged. I was convicted. I went to prison. I have had a long time to think about the sequence of events that led from a profile I created on a board Tuesday evening to the death of a young man who was 22 years old. I have had a long time to think about the woman behind Talhut Blonde, about what she was doing and why, about whether she understood the consequences she was setting in motion, about whether the consequences were, in some sense, part of what she wanted. I think about Barrett. I think about him more than I think about anything else. He was a young man with his whole life ahead of him. He was not responsible for what she did to me. He was not responsible for what I did to him. He was caught between two people who were both lying, one of them to the world, one of them to themselves, and he paid for it with everything he had. I tell this story not because it reflects well on me. It does not. I tell it because the person who sat down in front of that screen and created a fake profile on a Tuesday evening was certain he understood the difference between fantasy and reality. He was certain he was in control. He was certain nothing real could happen in a space made entirely of words and photographs. He was wrong about all of it. And by the time he understood how wrong he was, it was too late for Barrett. It was too late for me, and it was too late for everything we both lost. I need to tell you this from the outside first, then from the inside, because that is the only way it makes sense. From the outside, my girlfriend had been in an online relationship with a man she had never met for over a year. She believed he was real. She believed he cared about her. She had told me about him, carefully in the way people disclose complicated things, as a friendship, an emotional connection she had developed online with someone who understood her. I had questions. I was not comfortable with it. But she was a grown adult with her own emotional life, and I told myself that drawing a hard line over something I could not fully understand would do more damage than giving her space to navigate it herself. From the inside, I loved her. I wanted her to be okay. I wanted to trust her. And I wanted the thing she described as an online friendship to be exactly what she said it was. She had not shown me photographs. She had not shared the messages. She had given me a version of him that was curated and careful. A man overseas, going through a difficult period, someone she had connected with during a hard stretch of her own life. The name she used for him felt constructed, though I could not have told you why at the time. It just had that quality, the quality of a name that someone chose rather than was given. This went on for months after I found out about it. I managed the discomfort. I told myself it was not my place. I told myself my instincts were probably colored by jealousy. I told myself a lot of things. On a Saturday in November, I was at her house. We had spent the morning together, had eaten lunch, were sitting in the living room doing nothing in particular. A knock at the door. She answered it. Two people were standing on the porch. Plain clothes, credentials out before she had a chance to process the fact that they were there. Federal agents. They were polite. They asked if they could come in. She looked at me. I looked at her. We both stepped back. They came into the living room and they sat down and they explained why they were there. The man she had been talking to, the name she had given him, the identity she had believed in for over a year, did not exist. The photographs she had been sent were stolen from another source. The person behind the messages was a man in his mid-40s with a criminal record across multiple states. He had been running this operation for years, simultaneously, on multiple women. The agents had been investigating him for months and had been tracking down the people he had contacted before making the arrest. She was one of them. I will not describe what her face looked like in that moment. That is hers to carry, and I will not put it into the world. What I will tell you is that she asked them to repeat what they said. Twice. As if the first two times had produced sounds but not meaning. And then she said the name she had known him by, the constructed name, quietly, like a question, and the agent said that is not his name. The next hour was the most uncomfortable hour of my life. They needed to go through everything. Every message, every photograph he had sent, every piece of information she had shared about her own life, her own location, her own circumstances, because some of that information constituted evidence and some of it constituted risk that they needed to assess. I stayed because she asked me to. She could not look at me directly. She answered their questions in the careful, compressed way of a person who is managing an enormous amount of material in real time, while also trying to present a functional exterior. They were professional and they were kind. They thanked her. They left. We sat in silence for a while. Then she started to speak, and I listened, and what she described was the architecture of it, how it had been constructed piece by piece over months, how each element had been designed to feel specific and real and personal, how the emotional intimacy had been built with the patient precision of someone who knew exactly which levers to pull and in what order. She had not been stupid. That is the thing I want to be clear about. She had not been naive in any simple sense. She had been targeted by someone who was very good at what they did, someone who had done it many times, someone who had refined the methodology over years of practice on women who were going through difficult periods in their lives and were therefore accessible to exactly the kind of connection he was performing. I drove home that evening. I thought about everything I had told myself in the months since I found out about the online friendship. About trust, about space, about not letting jealousy color my instincts. My instincts had not been colored by jealousy. My instincts had been right. The name had felt constructed because it was constructed. The details had felt curated because they were curated. The emotional precision had felt almost too good because it was engineered. I broke up with her shortly after. Not because of what happened, not because of anything she had done. I broke up with her because I realized I had spent months suppressing the knowledge that something was wrong in order to avoid a conversation that frightened me, and in doing so, I had made myself complicit in a prolonged deception that I had sensed and chosen not to name. I have thought about that choice a great deal, about the specific moral weight of knowing something is not right and choosing comfort over confrontation, about the unnamed man in his mid-40s who had, at that very moment, dozens of other women in dozens of other conversations who each believed he was real. Each of them alone with a phone or a laptop, each of them talking to nothing, each of them being listened to and cataloged and used. I do not know his real name. I do not know if he was ever arrested. I know that he was very good at making people feel seen. I did not go looking for a relationship. That needs to be understood from the beginning because the way people react to catfish stories when the victim is a man tends to follow a predictable script. The assumption that he was lonely, desperate, naive in the specific way that people assume men are naive when it comes to attention from attractive women online. I was none of those things. I was 28, working a job I liked, living in a city I had chosen, with enough of a social life that being alone did not feel like a problem. The message was entirely unsolicited. She sent the first one. It was ordinary enough, a comment on something I had posted in a hobbyist forum, a shared interest, a casual opening. We started talking. Her name was Jade, or at least that was the name on the profile. The photographs were striking. A woman in her late 20s, dark-haired, with a particular quality in her expression that suggested self-possession. A person who was comfortable with themselves and did not perform for the camera. We had things in common, many things, an almost suspicious number of things, though I did not register the suspicion at the time. The books she mentioned were books I had mentioned. The films she referenced were ones I had discussed. The opinions she held aligned with mine with a consistency that I found, looking back, too precise to be coincidental. But when you are talking to someone you find compelling, you do not audit the coincidences. You experience them as evidence of compatibility. You experience them as connection. Over 7 months, we developed something that I would have called, without hesitation, a genuine relationship. We had spoken on the phone. Her voice was what I expected it to be, warm, measured, with a slight accent I could not entirely place. We had been on the edge of meeting several times. There was always a reason it did not happen. A work commitment, a family situation, a complication at the last minute that felt plausible each time it occurred and began to feel like a pattern only when I laid all the instances end to end. The 7th time a meeting fell through, I did something I should have done earlier. I took the profile photograph and ran a reverse image search. The image came back in seconds. The woman in the photograph was real. She had a name, not Jade, and a life that I could access in about 60 seconds of searching. She was a photographer based in a city I had never been to. She had no idea her photograph was being used. I contacted her. She was understandably alarmed. She had received messages from several people over the past year that suggested her photographs were being circulated under a false identity, but she had not been able to determine the full scope of it. She had never heard the name Jade. She could not help me identify who was behind the profile. I went back through 7 months of conversation with the knowledge that everything I had been shown was false. The photographs were not her. The name was not real. The job she had described, the apartment, the city, the backstory, all of it was construction. But the voice on the phone was real. And there was something in the voice, something in the specific rhythm of the speech that I had heard before, not in the calls, somewhere else. It took me a week to isolate it. It was a woman I worked with, not closely. We were in different departments, shared a building, passed in corridors, occasionally attended the same meetings. She was unremarkable in the way that colleagues you do not interact with directly tend to be unremarkable. Present, background, not particularly distinct. But the voice on the phone was hers. I was certain of it by the end of that week. Not approximately hers. Not similar. Hers, with the specific cadence that becomes recognizable when you have heard it enough times in a physical space. I went back through what she would have known about me from our shared workplace. The books I had left visible on my desk. The films I had mentioned in group conversations. The opinions I had offered in meetings. The interests I had discussed with mutual colleagues. All of it was in the conversation history. Everything Jade had claimed to share with me, she had learned from watching me in the building where we both worked. For at least 7 months, probably longer if she had been researching before she made contact, she had been watching, taking notes, building a version of herself designed to be exactly what I would respond to. I did not confront her directly. I consulted a lawyer. The advice was to document everything, report to HR, and avoid direct confrontation. I did all three. She was placed on leave during the investigation. She did not return to the company. I never found out the full scope of it. How long she had been watching before the first message. How many other people she had done this to. What she had intended the outcome to be if the meetings had ever actually happened. What I am left with is this. For 7 months, I spent significant hours every week in a conversation that felt real and meaningful with someone who did not exist. Every emotional investment I made was being made into a void. Every detail I shared about my actual life was being received by a person who was simultaneously standing 30 feet away from me in a meeting room on a Wednesday morning. The intimacy I felt was manufactured. The connection was engineered. And the engineer was someone I had looked at without seeing, in a building I worked in, every day of those 7 months. People ask me what the worst part was. They expect me to say the betrayal, the wasted time, the humiliation of having been fooled. Those things were real. But the worst part was subtler than any of them. The worst part was standing in a corridor one afternoon, about 2 weeks after I understood what had happened, and passing her without giving any indication that I knew, looking at her looking at me. Both of us continuing down the corridor as if it were an ordinary Tuesday, and understanding in that moment the full depth of the performance she had been sustaining. Not just the online performance, the in-person one. Every morning she had come to work knowing what she was doing. Every meeting, every corridor, every unremarkable Tuesday in a shared building, she had known. And she had not flinched once. That kind of self-possession, deployed in the service of something like this, is not something I have a comfortable word for. It is not something I have been able to fully set down. It sits in a specific drawer in my mind, and I try not to open it often. But when I do, what I find there is not the profile, not the photographs, not even the voice on the phone. What I find is the corridor. Her face. Tuesday morning. Neither of us saying anything. Both of us pretending that what we each knew was not there between us. That is what I carry. That is what I cannot explain. And that is what I think about every single time someone tells me that catfishing is just a modern inconvenience. Just the ordinary hazard of online connection. Just something that happens and you get over. You do get over it. But you do not forget the corridor. You never forget the corridor.